Hi all, this is Skate, and in this one we are going to go through, well, very quickly, the Spring Maneuvers new event setup, and then we're going to have a good chat about the T44-100. But first up, how do you get the T44-100? Well, you have two different types of currencies in this event. You have the combat emblems and the spring pins. Now, combat emblems you can accrue in one night. Basically, the way they work is you play 3 games back to back. Out of those 3 games, your game with the highest XP, you'll then be awarded that amount of combat emblems. So if you played 30 games back to back, you're going to know how far off you are from this tank on that currency anyway. Now you need 11,200 combat emblems to get the tank without paying any gold. So my personal recommendation is get on Blitz Stars, click on the columns option, and then add the average XP column if you haven't done so already. And then order every single tank you have via average XP. Pick whichever tank you are most confident in then out of your highest average XP tanks. Personally, I didn't bother looking at the max XP because that's max, not your average. Your average is the one you're going to be statistically more consistent in. For myself, I went with an STB1. Now, it's not my highest average XP tank. In fact, Churchill 3 is higher than it. Churchill 3, remember, is a tier 5 tank. It's a premium, and it has an XP percentage boost, basically, and that's on the base XP. So have a look at that, see if it's one you're consistent in. The reason I picked an STB1 is because you can accrue a lot of base XP with spotting and assistance damage, tracking targets for the big nasty TDs at the back to deal damage for you. So for that reason, STB1 for me was the option. Next up, the spring pins. Now, these are obtained by doing your missions, basically. We're all very familiar with it. Now, you need 1,925 spring pins to get the T44-100 without putting any gold into it. Now, looking at my last few mission resets, you're going to receive an average of about 150 spring pins per 3 missions. This is obviously going to be over a 10-day period, so that means you have 20 mission resets, all giving you an average of 150 pins, or thereabouts. In other words, 1,925 divided by 150 average is going to give you 12.8, so you need 13 mission resets, approximately. It may differ slightly, but you don't have to panic and get in every single mission. It's worth trying to. It's the weekend, I know a lot of people don't work, it's going to be my reason for trying to get more in. Usually in the week I can't get 2 mission resets. But in theory, it's perfectly possible over a 10-day period to maybe squeeze 1 or 2 more in on a weekend, and thus, it's not going to be a hard one. This Spring Maneuvers is actually quite a simplistic event, which makes a very nice change. And I'm making a happy video so far on this event. All this depends on how much gold you need to spend to get your T44-100. It is entirely dependent on how your games go, which is why I recommend not one specific tank like a Churchill 3 because it has a base XP multiplier. Look at your specific tanks on blitzstars.com. The column isn't there straight away unless, like I said, you've added it already. It's the XP per battle. That's the one you're statistically going to be more consistent in, and thus, in theory, more chance of accruing. In other words, again, it's a surprisingly simplistic, straightforward, easy to understand event. But is the end goal worth it? Is the main prize good? Well, for how easy the grind is, yeah. Based on that, it's a free tier 8 premium tank, or it's going to end up being a tier 8 premium tank, which is going to cost very little in gold. Or you could have horrifically bad games during those 3 and get very low XP, and in that case, well, it's RNG for you, and potato teams. But the actual tank, if you want an accurate description, meh. I've said that about other tanks. It's the best description. It's like, meh. It's not great. It's usable, it works, but it's not as good as some of the other tier 8 tanks out there. Now, it's nice to see there isn't a blatantly flat-out OP tank being introduced, which completely power creeps all the tech tree tanks. But the problem you've got is there's so many at tier 8 already, to bring one in which isn't, kind of makes this lackluster in comparison to what else is available. Which the back end of that is it makes this thing a little bit disappointing. For a free tank, I'm not going to complain. If I paid for this, well no, I wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't, quite simply, I wouldn't pay for it. Why would you pay for it when the other alternative is paying for a T44 Mod 1 when it becomes available again? It will become available again at one point. Or a Type 59. I'd pick a Type 59 over this. I'd probably enrich a T44 before I picked this. One thing I do love about this tank though is the model. It's got lots of little added extras on it which make it very nice to look at. But like I said, I wouldn't pay anything for it. In fact, I'm not a big Russian heavy tank fan. However, I'd still pick the IS-5 over this for consistency and for how good it is. Especially as the IS-5 only costs 1,500 gold. Now, you may end up getting this considerably less, and you could even get this for free. That being said, well, yeah, it's worth it then. But I'm probably going to get this, hopefully for free, or very, very little, because, well, I like to collect tanks. If I ended up screwing up the rest of my missions and not getting it, I wouldn't be too upset. First thing I want to do, based on that, is give you a comparative to the T44. Now you'll notice this has some extra little side skirts, and it has a turret, by the way, which looks like the T54 Mod 1's. Don't be fooled, it has the same armor layout as the T44's, but you'll notice the turret is wider, which makes it look like the T54 Mod 1's. But it's not. A T54... Right, actually, before we get confused with the T44, T54 Mod 1, and the T44-100, let me just compare the T44-100 to the T44. You're getting an extra 6mm of side armor with those side skirts. It does class as spaced armor, but it is only 6mm. You're not really gaining a tremendous amount based on that. Gun comparative, there's 3 DPM between it. There's nothing. It's negligible. What is significant, however, is the gun depression. A T44 has 7 degrees of gun depression, which I would describe as respectable gun depression values. This has 5 degrees of gun depression, which means it's less flexible, less usable, and there's less positions and less of the hull you can hide, which is quite significant if you ask me. And that's pretty much the trade-off for an extra 6mm of side armor, which is spaced. But that's not all. Did you notice how the IS-3 Defender was keeping the same speed as me? In fact, he was ever so slightly pulling ahead of me. A T-44 has 748 brake horsepower. This only has 572. Which means this is slower, it feels more sluggish, it's got a better traverse speed, but it just has worse acceleration. Going up hills, you're going to struggle more. I mean, you can't circle an IS-3 Defender. And an IS-3 Defender with a shed ton more armor is going to pull away from you. In fact, mobility-wise, this thing is closer to the T-54 Mod 1 than it is to the T-44. Except a T-54 Mod 1 has considerably better armor to balance it. Never thought I would use the word balanced with T-44 Mod 1 in the same sentence. But what I'm trying to say is that T-44 is better than this tank. It's more mobile than this tank, and really, why do they give it the 572 brake horsepower engine rather than the 748 one? It means a T-44 has 22.26 power to weight ratio, horsepower per ton. This only has 17.27. A Mod 1 has 16.28. It's frustrating. It is frustrating because I don't understand why this tank is just so meh. It's the best description. It's just... It's just feels so lackluster. I mean, yeah, I've had some good games in it. And it does perform. But when you say it does perform, some of the worst tanks in the game still perform. A Churchill gun carrier still works. It's still got positives about it. A Stereo Meal still has positives about it. But in Tier 8, where things are already fairly significantly odd, and you are coming up against a lot of different variations of IS tanks, which are surprisingly mobile considering how heavy they are, you're going to struggle to circle those things in this. Doesn't matter in a Mod 1, does it? Because you can angle up and you'd be surprised how much you bounce of those things, especially when you have 180mm of frontal turret armor and 120 on the front of the hull. This thing does not. And I don't understand why they gave it a Mod 1 style turret with the same armor as a T44, and the end result of that is sacrificing 2 degrees of gun depression, which, like I said, is pretty damn significant. And like this one, AMX on the enemy team. How's the T44? It's meh. It turned out this was a pretty good game, so he may have thought I was being sarcastic, because this is the first game someone said, what's the T44 like? And my answer was, it's meh. And I did have a pretty good game. Yeah, so he probably thought I was taking the mick. But that's the thing, is you can have a good game in any tank. Like I said, some of the worst or least enjoyed tanks in the game, you can have good games in, and people can perform well in them. But this thing, well, why would you play it when you can go buy a Tech Tree T44 or a T54 Mod 1 you can buy? The only reason you'd go for this is because it's free. Other than that, no. You're sacrificing so much for the 6mm side skirts. If you come up against a Mod 1 head-to-head in this, it will destroy you. It has more armor, so there's a high probability you're going to bounce off it. And it only has 116 less DPM. So where your 175mm is lackluster for his armor, his 175mm is going to be no problem at all against you. In fact, even stranger, the Mod 1 has ever so slightly better shell velocity. Very, very slight, but it is there. It's still something else it's better at. Then you have to try and look at a silver lining, guys. If this tank is poor, and it's not impressive, and it's going to be outclassed, well, there's a probability it's going to get buffed. And being as in theory it's going to be cheap for a lot of us, and for a lot of us it's going to be free, it's worth getting. It's a tier 8 premium tank at the end of the day, and putting it in the garage and letting it collect dust. And hopefully Wargaming sees the same thing we do and buff it slightly. Is it worth it is the straight answer, though. That's pretty much what everybody wants to know. Is it worth the grind? Well, of course it is. It's pretty easy to get. And it's a premium tier 8 tank. And it's based off a T44, which is a good, strong, reliable tank. And I just shot the gun of that Borsig. But yeah, of course it is worth the grind. It's an easy grind. You'll do it just, well, I think the vast majority of people will do it just by playing. You're playing anyway, so go for it. It's an easy grind event. Is the tank at the end of it worth it? Well, yeah, it's worth it for the fact it's a tier 8 premium tank. However, I think it's going to get bullied by IS-3 defenders. I think it's going to get outclassed by a Mod 1. I think a Type 59 will be able to deal with this tank no problem at all. In my book, it's certainly a tank which needs improving, but it's still something worth going to try and get, because it's free, and even if you let it collect dust, you've still got an extra tier 8 premium tank for free. And, like I said, they could buff it, which means you could end up in the future with a nice T44 premium. That game though, we did 4,118 damage and we made 108,000 credits, which is a very nice amount of credits. Still not as good as something like a Lerva or a T34, but it's still a very respectable figure. And if you don't have one of the other types of premium at tier 8 and you're a free-to-play player, then it is 100% worth getting for you. And like I said, I am certainly going to be trying to get this thing. If I end up having to put a tiny little bit of gold into it, then, well, I do it anyway. But I'll probably try and just get my mastery badge in it and then let it collect dust in the hope that one day it gets a little bit of a buff. And I know many of you are going to disagree with my opinions, but they're my opinions. We all have different opinions. Hopefully you respect the fact that I'm just saying it as I personally see it, which is quite simply worth it for a free tank. However, it is a lackluster tank at tier 8. But, hope you enjoyed the video guys, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.